everyone. I do apologize if you've been waiting for some more updates, some more YouTube videos on anything I've been going over. I do apologize. We've been pretty busy here lately. We are out of town for a couple of weeks, and then when I got back into town, I just had a lot of things to get done in the house. But I'm back now to go over a few things today. I do want to let you know that we are having some new surroundings coming up in the next couple of weeks. You should probably see it in the next video coming up. The reason why it hasn't been there yet is we went there the other day, but we had some technical problems and then couldn't get it done. So we did fix the problem, and we should be out of the new surroundings in the next video or two. Today I'm going to go over the Gettysburg Address. What is the Gettysburg Address? The Gettysburg Address is a speech that Abraham Lincoln gave after the Battle of Gettysburg in November of 1863. Now, many of the powers that be after the battle, and I'm going to go over the Battle of Gettysburg later on. It was a 3-day battle. 80% of regiments 80% of regiments or divisions were killed or wounded. So it was a very bloody battle, very complicated battle to go over too. So I'll be going over that in the future. Hopefully, I have a friend of mine who's a big expert on the Gettysburg site too, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So I'm trying to get him to discuss with me some of the things that you want to see at the Gettysburg site. While he's going over the site, I'll be going over some of the battle, what happened in the battle. But for now, I'm going to go over the Gettysburg Address. It's a speech that Lincoln gave after Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, in November of 1863. Now, the powers of be wanted a cemetery dedicated to the Union soldiers that died. And there are Confederates buried there too, but mostly Union soldiers that died. And they wanted a dedication of that cemetery, Gettysburg Cemetery. They had hired a speechwriter by the name of Edward Everett, and he was a politician at the time, and he was good for giving speeches. He gave a 2-hour speech. They wanted Lincoln to appear as kind of an afterthought, basically thinking, well, it may be nice to have our commander-in-chief or the president of the United States there to give a speech. And they pretty much told him, we don't want any long speeches from you, and we don't want any of your homespun humor coming from you. Lincoln took that seriously because you can tell, I'm going to go over the speech with you in a few minutes, but he took it very seriously because it was a very somber, solemn moment for him to dedicate the cemetery. And on November 2nd of 1863, he was giving the invitation to give a speech at Gettysburg on November 19th of 1863. He did work on the speech a little bit on the train when he was going to Gettysburg. He didn't get much done on the train. He was suffering from an illness. I'll go over in a minute with you on that, a few minutes with you on that. He was suffering from an illness, so he wasn't really in the mood to do any speech writing. They got into Gettysburg the night before on the 18th of November, and there was a big reception, a welcome committee for him, and some of the dignitaries, including Edward Everett, who would give the speech before Lincoln. He didn't get much done during that time, but then he went back up to his room the night before, November 18th, and wrote the speech. He gave the speech on the next day in the afternoon of November 19th. Now, there was only a few pictures that were ever taken of him. One was by Alexander Gardner, who was one of the photographers during the Civil War. The other you may have heard of was Matthew Brady. He was a photographer during the Civil War. He was not there at the time. There was another photograph found in some. I believe in the Library of Congress. I'll try to post that for you so you can see that picture. But the main picture taken was of Lincoln before he gave the speech, and the reason why there is no photographs of him taking a picture is in those days they didn't have cell phones where you could lift up your camera, cell phone, and take a picture. They didn't even have movie film, so you're not going to see any movie film of him or any of those earlier days of them giving this speech because movie film wasn't developed until the late 1800s, early 1900s. So the only thing they had to take pictures was what's called a box camera, it was about 2.5 feet wide by about 2.5 feet deep. And the negative they used for the picture was a glass negative. It was a glass plate, just like a window plate that had chemicals on it, and they took the picture with it. But what happened is they had to load that picture, they had to load that plate in. Then they had to close it off so no light got in it. Then they had to open up the lens on the front of the camera and expose the picture. So it was a long process, and Lincoln's speech was only 2 minutes long, a little bit over 2 minutes long. So no one had the time to get anything set up on that. So that's why they did not have any pictures of the address. There are paintings out there, drawings of him out there giving this speech, but there's actually no pictures except him and the crowd before the speech was given. Um, Now, also, like I was saying before, Matthew Brady was the other photographer, was not there at the time. He was a big photographer. Him and Alexander were big photographers during the Civil War. Matthew Brady actually gave up his fortune. He inherited a lot of money from his family, and he invested a lot of money into photographing the Civil War because he wanted the people back home to see what actually devastating and how horrible war was. He actually went bankrupt, spent all his money for these to get these pictures out, and he died almost penniless. But what happened is Congress bailed him out and bought all the pictures off him that he had taken during the Civil War and of other times too. There were times where Matthew Brady he had a studio too, so he used to take pictures. Also, Alexander Gardner was another photographer during the Civil War, and he was the one that is accredited the Gettysburg Address picture too. Also, just so you know, the exposure time was very slow in those days with the cameras. That what they would do is that actually remove the camera lens, the cover of the camera lens, and there'd be about a minute or 2 minute exposure for the picture to be taken. So the photographers in those days had few that were around. There were not many because the equipment was so expensive to use and to buy. The photographers had studios in those days too. When they took pictures of when usually politicians were the ones that got the pictures taken. Matthew Brady had a studio. Alexander Gardner had a studio, but there was a stand that the person having the picture taken would stand against, called a lean-to, that would keep them still while the photographer took the picture because the exposure time was so long that any movement by the subject would blur. So you'll see in a lot of the old photographs where um, people are standing in front of a lean-to. It was a wooden stand about maybe 6 feet tall that had a cushion on the back, so somebody could lean their head on or lean their head against. There is one picture of Lincoln standing in front of one. Lincoln did have a picture taken by Matthew Brady when he was in New York City. Lincoln Abe was doing a speech at the Cooper Union, and he did one of many speeches that got him into the limelight uh, for the presidency. But he was doing a speech at the Cooper Union in New York City, and Matthew Brady had a picture taken of him there. The studios had a lot of windows, would have to have a lot of windows at that time because there was no electric lighting at the time. And the best light to get is daylight, so they'd have a lot of windows or open skylights to allow the sun in so they could get more light for the pictures. More on that later. Early film days had those those two. So, but just to give you a little information on the camera styles at the time and how they took the pictures. And you will notice that sometimes in the older pictures in that era, if somebody moved, uh, and that's why you have blurry pictures of some of the people in the pictures because they had actually moved during the 2 minute exposure time. But in reality, that's why we only have a few pictures at Gettysburg. Now, after Abe gave his speech at Gettysburg, he got on the train and he went back to Washington, D.C. Now, also, he had a valet, uh, someone who escorted him, valet, uh, servant, basically. They were really good friends. His name was William H. Johnson, valet, who accompanying him to Gettysburg. Now, like I said before, Abe was not feeling well. He was rather sick when he went up there and found out later on that he had a mild case of smallpox. Well, when he got back to Washington, D.C., he was actually bedridden for 3 weeks after that. His aide, his assistant, William Johnson, the valet, actually caught smallpox and died from it. So Lincoln decided that he was going to pay off this man's bills, all of his bills, and he make sure that he get buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Arlington National Cemetery was the um, cemetery taken over from Arlington House. Lee owned the Arlington House. Robert E. Lee owned the Arlington property, Arlington House, and the North Union decided to take that property and turn it into a cemetery. So Arlington National Cemetery is part of a property that Robert E. Lee did own at one time. Now, Robert E. Lee descendants did take uh, them to court over the taking of his property. And there was I believe there was some reimbursement given back to the Lee family. So there wasn't outright just taken. Congress did vote to give some reimbursement back to the Lee family, so they did get some kind of compensation for the property that was taken. Now, that speculation that William H. Johnson was buried in Arlington Cemetery. Some historians disagree with that, since Arlington Cemetery didn't really become a cemetery until several months after uh, Johnson's death. But there was a gravesite that person was reburied in Arlington Cemetery by the name of William H. Johnson, and at that time he was African American. At that time, they put anybody buried in Arlington Cemetery as their name and citizen, because nowadays you have to be military or someone of high rank to be buried in Arlington Cemetery. There's a few politicians like William Howard Taft is buried there, but and then John F. Kennedy. But there's speculation that he was never really buried there originally. There was other historians said that he was actually buried in Columbia Harmony Cemetery in Washington, D.C. But in any event, he was honored by Lincoln because he took care of Lincoln at the White House when Lincoln was sick with smallpox during that 3 weeks, and he actually caught smallpox himself and died January 28th of 1864. So he died shortly after Gettysburg. Abe's son and wife did not go to Gettysburg at the time. He had a son by the name of Tad Thomas. They call him Tad. Tad was suffering from smallpox at the same time. So Mary Todd stayed home with Tad while Abe went with Johnson and a few other escorts to Gettysburg. But you notice in some of these, you notice in this picture here that I have here of citizens that are buried in Arlington Cemetery. Mainly they buried them, calling them citizens because they weren't actually military figures at the time. But William H. Johnson, was a African American that stayed next to Lincoln, taking care of him through all of December up until January when he passed away from smallpox, and that's why Abe decided to pay off all his debt and honor him with pay for his gravesite in itself also. But in any event, that's what happened. The Gettysburg Address was only actually 2 minutes, a little bit over more than 2 minutes. And Edward Everett, who did a 2 hour speech before Lincoln, said that he had said that Abe had said more in 2 minutes than Edward, that he had tried in 2 hours. So that just gives you a little information on Gettysburg Address. I'm going to read it now for you, word for word. I'm probably not going to be as enthusiastic as Abe was when he gave it, but this Gettysburg Address is also at the Lincoln Memorial. So if you go to the Lincoln Memorial and you look on the wall around Lincoln is the Gettysburg Address, and you can also look it online. It's all over the place in books. Now, I do want to add that there were other photographers at the time, too, that were covering that time period in the Civil War also. But I'm just covering Alexander Gardner and Matthew Brady today. And so here goes the speech. fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who have gave their lives, that the nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather so, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here, dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from those honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And that's dated November 19th, 1863. If you time it when he did it, it actually came up, I think, about 2 minutes and 14 seconds. So it probably took me longer to read that than him to give the speech. But by the time the speech was done, no one had any pictures. They didn't have time. They didn't know it was going to be that short. Lincoln was not happy with the speech. He thought he failed at the speech. But as soon as the newspapers got a hold of that speech and published it, and they were astonished. They were all astonished by it, and everybody was so astonished by the speech that very little was said even afterwards. And that's why Lincoln thought that he had failed in the speech, because he had just given people, they were speechless after this speech. They could not say anything. So in reality, it was a very good speech, and he was not aware of it at the time. But like I said before, Edward Everett had said that he said more in 2 minutes than he did in 2 hours. So pretty much like that, not word for word, but pretty much like that. So basically, that's what the Gettysburg Address is. And like I said before, it is on the wall at the Lincoln Memorial, engraved on the wall. And if you want to read more about it, I'm sure there's more information out there. I've done a lot of research on the Civil War through the years, so I'm quite aware of it, but I never memorized it. So, but thank you for listening, and just remember, did you know? And we'll also probably have our new surroundings within the next couple weeks. So within the next couple videos, you're going to see that. But thank you for watching. Please subscribe so I know whether you're watching this or not. Thank you very much, and you have a good day.